What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, we got to look back at Mafia 2, continuing this run up until Mafia the Old Country. Did a video on Mafia 1 last week, Mafia 2 now, and then next week will be Mafia 3. Now, behind the scenes, I've just played 2. I've never actually played 3 all the way through, so I'm very, very excited to formulate an opinion on that one. But this game it's an interesting one because this is a game I remember loving quite a bit. And, I replayed it when Mafia 1 and 2 were coming out in that definitive edition kind of era, right? And remember, 2 was kind of that, well, it's going to be more of like a remaster. There's definitely things done to it. It was kind of tiers, right? Mafia 1 was like a full-on remake. 2 was like, yeah, we're going to do some work on this one. And then 3 was like, well, we'll stick a name to it, but we're not really going to change much to it, except for kind of put the whole thing together. So 2 is this middle ground of, it's not a full-on remake. In fact, it's not even close. In some ways, it's been improved. You look at footage of the original Mafia 2 to this one, and there have been improvements, but at the same time, we got to talk about in this video, there's been some things that have not improved. In fact, I think they got worse. Some pretty funny, actually, at times, bugs and glitches and things like that, but a thing that I don't think really helps the overall experience. And I will say, playing it now, I actually don't think I like it as much as I remember myself liking it. It's not a bad game by any means. We'll break down, all the parts of it in this video, but I think I can say pretty definitively, considering I just played these games literally back to back, like Mafia 1 and 2, I actually think 1 is far, far better. Now, it's got the remake treatment that very, very much helps it. If I was playing 1 original to this one, maybe I'd have different things to say. But let's go over some of it. So first thing, just kind of a quick behind the scenes thing that I was reading up on. This game took forever, right? So this game came out in 2010. It seems like there's kind of conflicting reports of if this game actually started in 2002, right after Mafia 1, or if it was 2004. I saw some places that said 2004, some that said 2002. Either way, pretty long game, right? It was originally going to be made for the PS2 kind of console era, and then eventually it got shifted to PS3 and 360. So, you think about games nowadays that take 5, 6, 7 years. That's literally, games back then didn't take that long, right? Games back then took 2 or 3 years, and it takes this game, pretty much the average time it would take a game nowadays to come out. But it did make it, came out in 2010, came out with cut content. A lot of content was cut that people eventually found out, later. Even a repurposed mission that was originally, seemingly in the base game was then later used for DLC. So the game had some troubles, but it came out and it did very well. I think it established the Mafia franchise at the time. And in a lot of ways, I'll even say, playing it right now, you can see the improvements, even though, again, I'm going from a remake of 1, which kind of elevates it past what it really should have. Remake going to this game, I think, in parts, this game is like a kind of a cleaner experience. But I will say, in terms of storytelling, I think storytelling is the big part that I actually very much prefer the first game over this game, which I didn't actually originally feel, but we'll get into that in a second. So in terms of, the game itself, one thing I want to talk about, we'll start with the gameplay and then we'll move into the story and characters. So I noticed this and I read up on this and I thought this was pretty cool. So the vehicles, obviously one thing these games do really well, right, is put you in that era. And I think that's very important for a game like Mafia. And so, you have all the different cars, the radio stations, and just the environment. We talked about that with the first game. And I think this game doesn't do as good of a job, to be honest with you, of putting you into that era and into that town versus what the first game did. But it does do it. I'm not saying it doesn't do it at all. I don't think does it as well. But one thing I noticed, early on in the game, I thought, oh my dear God, the driving is back. And the games have very specific driving that you kind of get used to. And, by the end of the game, I'm doing well. I'm taking turns quite well. And, if I have to do a chase sequence or keeping up with a vehicle, I can do it. I can definitely pull it off. But in the beginning of the game, it's all snowy. And it's oh my God, this is so freaking hard to drive. And then eventually you kind of realize, you can read up on it, to which I did both of those things. It actually depends. When it's snowy and in that time, it'll actually be very difficult to drive because it'll be slippery versus, when it's not snowing. So, and those kind of the attention to detail like that, I think is really, really cool. Going into a store and being able to rob it, even something pretty simple like that, right? I needed to change clothes towards the end of the game, so I went into a store and robbed them. And it's it's just a cool, small little thing. I don't know if this was the remaster, if this was the original. I imagine it's because of the remaster. When you shoot, you can actually actually like shoot things off of things. Now, I imagine some of that was in the game, because if there's like wooden like planks or whatever, you can shoot through those. But even like pillars, you can shoot like the tile. It looks like, at least you can shoot it off of it. So there's some cool details, like smaller details that I don't know if it helps, because I mean, when you're in a firefight, you're in a firefight. And speaking of that, and going into some of the difficulty of this game, holy dear God. So I play it on normal. I'm not looking to kill myself. I'm looking to have an okay time, challenge myself a little bit, but not be a handheld. Okay, that's what I try to do with most games. So I go into this game, I play it on normal. Who designed the normal difficulty in this game? Because it's insane. You can take like 3 shots and be dead. And I'll tell you, towards the end of the game, that becomes a really, really big problem, because, actually Joe is a pretty good shot, or anybody that's with you is a pretty good shot. So when you have missions with other people, honestly, I just let them do the work most of the time, at least to clear out like the first wave, because you can be in an area, there can be like 12 enemies in front of you, and if you pop your head out, you're gonna get shot and killed. So it's like, all right, I'll let the AI take out the first couple, and then you're not just having like a bullet storm being flung at you, and then I'll start to peek my head out and get some eliminations, let's say, right? When they're not with you, which is the end of the game, it's insane. When you have to go through a freaking army multiple times, I died a lot, and I feel like I only died because, you take like 2, 3, 4 shots and you're dead. There's a part of me that likes that, because it's like, well, that's the realism. It goes to like Battlefield and Call of Duty. Call of Duty, you can take a couple extra shots than Battlefield, and it's kind of like the vibe of each game. You either have to embrace it or not, and I mean, but those are what those games are. And same thing here. It's like, well, I can cry all I want, and boy did I, or I got very close to. And but at the same time, you have to just go through it. The gunplay is tough. Like when I first started it, I said I really don't like it. And I don't know. I feel like it's because of the remake of 1. And we talked about this, in last week's video. Like, I'm trying to think, like, in my head, okay, envision 1's gameplay. See, 1's gameplay is rough because it's so stiff. And, I mean, that's something that's massively done better here. I mean, like, sneaking is like you arching your back just a little bit. Like, it's not even crouching. You're not crouching when you're being stealthy in this game. It's actually quite funny. But, they are trying. It is less stiff. When you're into, like, fist fights, it's so much better. So much better. And, it's a little arcadey in that, you just hold X, to do the dodge, and then you do a quick little swipe at them. You have heavy attacks, you have light attacks. It's simple but effective. It's something that if you put that into a game literally right now, I really wouldn't have too much problem with it. It is simple probably by today's standards, but I think it works really well. And dear God above, compared to the first game. And it goes to that stiffness, right? First game, if you get into a hand-to-hand fight, God bless you. And then even shooting, is just your torso is like a robot, and it moves at like 1 mile per hour, so you cannot turn left to right literally at all. So those things have been improved. Now when you're actually aiming and stuff like that, it's still not amazing. I actually find it's almost like in a middle ground, because the first game you kind of have an excuse, because like Tommy as his like core is a driver, what I mean, like that's how they find him. I guess you even see him in the game. He's literally a taxi driver. Second game, okay, Vito, he literally went to war. Now he went to war to get out of a little crime there, but he has experience, so there is a reason why he's better. And I mean, that does kind of reflect it, but it is still stiff. So it's kind of this middle ground where it's like, well, I get that he's better, and in a way it is better, to actually aim and shoot in this game, but at the same time, it's not all the like, I don't know, it's not modern. It still feels like it's when it came from, when they made this game, and you say, those are just the limitations, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, that was something that, I mean, I got used to it. I got a trophy. Maybe it was for getting like 5 headshots in a row. Maybe I've never done that before. I try to headshot everybody. In fact, I lose opportunities because I go for the head. So there was one opportunity where I just got like 5 in a row, got a trophy. Don't know if that's actually what the trophy was. Maybe it's like a combined total, but felt very proud of myself. So, it was whatever. The weapons in this game I do think are fun. And, it's got some physics to it where, it feels good, and, it looks realistic when these people drop and all that stuff. So that's all fun. And I would even say, I think one pretty big strength of this game too is is some of like the over-the-top missions. So that was something, I think the remake helps the first game and helps it kind of be more defined. And there's definitely some very, very big moments, in the first game, mission to mission. But sometimes it can get into, a flow, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can get into kind of this repetitive flow. The second game, at the end of the day, you're driving or you're shooting. Like that's pretty much it. I guess sometimes you're doing fighting maybe early on in this game, but I do like, while I think the story is weaker, which we'll talk about in a second, I think what they're doing, like they jump around better. Does that make sense? Like when they have the bomb and they're like the window cleaners, like that's a really incredible mission that, by the way, is not just, firstly, it's long, and there's kind of multiple stages, right? Because you're sneaking in, and then you actually have to do something, and then you have to go through a fight, and then at the very end, there's actually an emotional impact because you lose just this young kid that, Vito actually didn't even want him to go in the first place, right? And then Joe gets very, very mad that they took him out. So it really actually has all elements because it's got some story building, it's got some stealth, it's got some just kind of dialogue and like doing something, it's got a firefight, it's got the big moment, right, when you're on the balcony or whatever and it blows up, and then it's got the emotional kind of impact at the very end. So I think it's a very well-crafted mission. I think it does it better than a lot of the missions in the first game. And there's a couple of them. They jump around, like I said, quite a bit in the second game, and you're moving around. Like Vito, he goes to war, and you do that at least a little bit, right? He goes to jail, and you do that, and that's a story, like really cementing what's going to happen with Leo eventually, right? That's a really big moment, and you do a lot in jail, so you're always moving. Like there's that fluidity to it that I think is really, really good, even if I think that, and I guess we can kind of go into it because I don't have too much more to say. Again, I think the overall quest or mission, variety and the way that flow works is better in the second game. The one thing I will say is better in the first game, I think it's just the overall story. I think Tommy is definitely a better character to me than Vito. I think Vito and Joe make a really good pair, and that's tough because now you have to do like Tommy, Paulie, and Sammy, and then you compare it. You know what I mean? And so I actually will say, though, I prefer the first game, and I think when I first played them, I actually preferred the second game. I think it's because of the ending. You think about, by the way, I know some of the twists and some of the things that happen in 3, so that maybe clouds my judgment. But the ending of 2, if you just take 2, and I do want to spoil this, okay? You just take Mafia 2. It is a heartbreaking ending. I think it is one of the better endings in a game. And it's done in not a way you would think it's done, because and I love that. I love that about the stories of these games where it's like, small little thing is going to cause like this ripple effect, right? Like they say early on in the games, right, they don't deal with drugs, which by the way is a real thing, like for the Mafia, right? I've watched a lot, we've talked about this in the past. So they start doing it, and they know that they're not supposed to, they're doing it behind the scenes, right? And that literally is eventually what catches up to them. Firstly, it starts an all-out war, or it almost starts an all-out war, and it gets to the conclusion where, Vito does what he has to do, and you think Joe is going to betray you. He doesn't. You go through that whole arc with Carlo, and then you leave, and then Joe, you know what's probably going to happen to Joe. And that's heartbreaking, where it's like, hey, where are they taking Joe? Joe wasn't part of the deal. And it's like, oh my dear God, that's heavy. That's really heavy, because I think that shows, the impact those two characters had on me and also the audience, right? If you didn't care about Joe, that ending doesn't really hit. You know what I mean? So it's like, they did do a really good job. And those two together, I do think are really good. They're very funny. They got a good back and forth. They're very helpful to each other. Again, in terms of like keeping things moving, like your house gets burnt down, right? As Vito, you have to escape and go to Joe. So you're always moving, but those two are like thick as thieves, right? They do the cigarette thing in the beginning, and they're doing all sorts of different heists together, and they rise up the ranks together in a different way, I will say, than the first game. The first game, I just think maybe it's because you were so close to like Don, and I felt like you were a little bit more part of it in the first game, like literally part of the Mafia. In this game, you're rising up the ranks. The part where you actually are rising up the ranks, though, are told through cutscenes. And that one I didn't love because I was like, okay, you do some things, but it didn't feel like the missions you were actually completing were the things to get you to that next level. Instead, a lot of that stuff, or like say even when, okay, they're making all this money selling drugs, all of that, for the most part, is told through cutscenes. And then, by the way, they have no money to pay, off these debts. And it's like, but you were just making an insane amount of bank for God knows how many months or weeks or whatever, and you have no money to pay off that loan interest when Henry gets the axe, let's say. So, some of the story things like that just felt very confusing to me, where it's like, well, why wouldn't you have the money? You don't have any set aside. I get, Vito's house burned down, but that was way earlier. That was kind of a different situation. So that was just, I don't know, it's specific, but I guess it's not specific. Maybe I'm not being specific enough. I liked the overall story. I liked it, and I like that it keeps you moving. Again, I'm not saying it's weak by any means. I just think I like the first one better. The second one, I think, is a little bit more character reliant on, Joe and Vito together, and then also just keeping them moving and keeping them doing something. There is definitely a rising of the ranks feel to the second game, but like I said, first game just felt like, well, you're always there. It felt longer, to be honest with you, and it felt like, okay, you can feel like as you're getting more powerful and as you're getting more rich. Second game, I think because it kept jumping you around, it's like, well, when your house burns down, you don't really feel like you're all that in control, and I guess maybe that's the point, right? But even by like the end of the game, when Vito's saying like, I wanted a life of this, and this, it's like, well, you had those things for like 10 minutes, and that you really didn't have those things for all that long. It took you a very long time to get in. It took you a very long time to be a made man, and so you're not really even making money before that. And then after that, you did okay, and then you do a couple jobs, and you get with Henry, and then that was a bad idea. All that stuff happened. Again, there's some really big moments, like Henry getting axed. Let's just call it that, because there's other words that you could probably use that are not YouTube friendly. In the middle of the freaking park, I remembered like the outcome. Like I remembered he didn't make it, but I didn't really remember how. And then as soon as it got to the park, I was like, oh, I do remember a park, and it's like, okay, this is definitely where he dies, but how does he die? And then, oh my dear God, it can be brutal. And look, those are the things that I can appreciate, about this game. Kind of again, I want to say realism. Take that with a grain of salt, but again, these are not like the biggest things of all time. You know what I mean? Like nothing is that huge of a scale, but like, again, because it's so grounded in this mob story, it hits. It's like, well, selling drugs and then like getting caught. And I think we said this about the first game too, right? Where it's like, if this was another universe, there's a way of just like making it all go away. You know what I mean? You clean house, you take out an entire gang, or you pay them off, or you just talk to them and they forgive you. But it's like, that's not this universe, right? This universe is more serious. This universe, like, yeah, you took out armies of people somehow, but you can't actually eliminate an entire family to like save yourself, right? Like that's not going to happen. That's number one. You can't pay them off. Like it's this brotherhood, it's this code, and you broke it, and there's punishments to be had there, and that is the kind of grounded reality, even though it's a video game, that I really, really appreciate about it. Overall, again, I really enjoyed it. It got frustrating. I'm not going to lie to you. I died far, far more in this game than I did in the first game. I think it's because of enemy, there's just more of them. There's more firefights. There's just more opportunities to get shot, and that it just happened more. So it was more of a frustrating experience, because I think, again, the gunplay was better, and it was good, but it wasn't the most clean and fluid that I thought it could be. But it keeps you going. The story keeps you going. The characters keep you going, and I think that bouncing around type nature keeps you going as well. So I had a ton of fun. I would definitely say I like the first game more. At this point, I would say 1, 2, 3, because I did play a little bit of 3 back in the day and wasn't a huge fan. We'll see how I feel now, and we'll see where I can rank it at the end of the day. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and hope to see you all on the next one.